We're happy to have political science professor at the University of New Haven, Dr. Matt Schmidt, joining us now. Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Why don't we start by talking about the overall turnout, because that certainly seems to be the early story of Election Day and the days preceding today.
Yeah, the big story, of course, is the pandemic, and that the pandemic has driven already 2/3 as many votes have been cast as in 2016 altogether. That's a huge story that changes how today's going to turn out and the weight of the votes that get cast today versus the votes that have been cast earlier.
All right, talking about the polls and the margin of error that come with them on this election day, what are you seeing right now?
So again, what has to happen is that the Republicans have to turn out almost 2/3 as many voters today versus what what Democrats turn out because of this early voting. And what that ends up meaning is that in order for the polls to be off like they were in 2016, they'd have to be off almost twice as much, right? Which isn't impossible, but it's pretty unlikely. And remember, we've been talking about polling error for 4 years, and the pollsters have been talking about it, right, probably for longer. So they've done a lot to correct those polls. It's always possible that there's this kind of systemic error that's happening state after state after state and getting things wrong, but it's unlikely, and it's less likely than it was in 2016.
Yeah, well, that was my understanding, is that sometimes if one poll is off for one reason, all the polls could be off for the exact same reason. But also talk a little more finely about that, because there's a difference between the national polling, when you're just looking at all voters, versus specific state-level polling in battleground states, where I think the margin, at least in 2016, was a lot closer and might be a lot closer this time around looking at the polls.
Right. So again, the basic idea is we don't have a national election. We have a 50 state plus a district plus territories election in each one of those. And what it really comes down to is 12 or 13 states that are going to flip the Electoral College one way or the other. And what we're seeing consistently in this race is that the polling has been pretty stable in those races right now. And so when we talk about forecasts, these things aren't predictions, right? They're forecasts. It's kind of like, think about like the Kentucky Derby, right? You have all these thoroughbreds on the course and you have a mule, right? By the fact that the mule is on the course, the mule has a chance of winning, however unlikely. And so when we look at these forecasts and we say the Biden campaign has a 90% chance of winning the election today, well, that doesn't mean that the president doesn't have a chance. It just means that the things that have to go right, which could in fact go right, are less likely, right? There are fewer opportunities for them to go right than in the other direction. Put it in another way, there are a lot of things that Biden can do wrong, right? There are states that can go wrong for Biden, and he still has a path to victory. There's really only one path for the president. He has to win every state he won in 2016 plus some.
What are the biggest states that you're particularly keeping an eye on?
So early on, it's Florida, which right now is leaning Democratic. They are interesting because they're used to having a lot of mail-in ballots cast, and they're pretty good at getting that taken care of. So you could see a result from them today. If Florida doesn't go for the president, it's very unlikely that he has any path to go forward. If Florida does break for the president early, then I would expect other nearby states like Georgia or North Carolina to also go for the president, which again would be against where the polls are showing us right now. And then, of course, Pennsylvania is the big one. If the president doesn't win Pennsylvania, there's really no path for him. Whereas if the Biden campaign loses Pennsylvania, it's tougher, but there's still a way for them to eke out a victory.
Yeah, I'm seeing there's not always the most clear-cut plan B for Joe Biden should he lose Pennsylvania, but there are some other avenues. Doctor, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Of course, I believe you'll be back with us, I think, again tomorrow, because there's going to be a lot to talk about tomorrow and in the rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good.